Good evening and welcome everyone. The Michigan Community Scholars Program, or also known on campus as MCSP, is one of 12 living learning communities, and our community is mainly first-year students who have an interest in community service and social justice and diversity issues. And therefore, this fits right in with what we're going to be discussing this evening. We are so excited that you have joined us, and we again are so thankful with the collaboration that we have developed over a number of years with the Ann Arbor District Library. This permits students as well as community members to get a chance to talk and to learn about issues happening both in our community and sometimes nationally as well. I also want to thank the LSNA school here at the University of Michigan, which is giving us support for these issues, as well as DEI, which also has been very supportive. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our director of the program, Christine Modi, who will take you further into our program. Christine?
Thanks, Wendy. And thank you all for being here tonight for what I think is a really important conversation. We have observed events unfold across our nation in the last 6 months that have shocked and saddened, but probably not surprised us, as we've witnessed issues of police brutality and reminders that justice and equity has not yet been achieved, particularly not in our criminal legal system. And so it seemed particularly timely that the Citizens for Racial Equity in Washtenaw published their report late this summer, revealing inequities in our local criminal justice system. What happens here is part of what happens all across our nation. And as the Crew report itself points out, understanding it here, we can't understand what's happening across our nation until we understand what's happening at the local level. And so this is a chance for MCSP students, MCSP staff members, like me and Wendy, and one of our colleagues who's also on the call, university community members and members of Washtenaw County to get together and to look at this issue as it manifests right here in our town, in our county. I want to start with just a quick excerpt or a quick quote from Bryan Stevenson's TED Talk. This was presented as sort of a way to get into some of these issues if you were unfamiliar with them. Maybe you had a chance to watch this TED Talk. If you haven't watched it yet, I want to encourage you to do so when you have a moment. And he says, sort of moving towards the end of his talk, something that I thought struck me particularly as a member of a very privileged faculty on a very privileged university campus. Speaking to the TED audience, he says, despite the fact that our technology and our sophistication is so dramatic and so beautiful and so inspiring and so stimulating, we will ultimately not be judged by our technology. We won't be judged by our design. We won't be judged by our intellect and reason. Ultimately, you judge the character of a society not by how they treat the rich and powerful and the privileged, but by how they treat the poor, the condemned, and the incarcerated. Because it's in that nexus that we actually begin to understand truly profound things about who we are. And I've been carrying with me Bryan Stevenson's call to get close to the problem so that we can really understand it. And I am hoping that this conversation with all of you will help us to do that. I want to quickly introduce our panelists. We are so grateful that they're willing to give their time to talk about this really important issue with us. First is Jeffery Harrold. He's the senior pastor of New Beginnings Community Church of Washtenaw County. He has been involved in a jail ministry for over 25 years and is also a leader of the Washtenaw Faith Leaders Forum, which has convened community conversations related to race and policing, among other topics. He's a founding member of We Rock, the Washtenaw Regional Organizing Coalition that brings together labor and faith communities. Jeff is also an advisor at the Noonan Academic Advising Center, a member of the LSA Academic Standards Boards, and the Community for Academics, the coordinator for academic standards and special populations. Jeff Irwin is the state senator from Michigan's 18th district. He's a long history of political leadership in the county, serving on the Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners and also in the State House of Representatives. He currently serves on the Senate Judiciary and Public Safety Committee. In September, he introduced a bill that would automatically expunge the criminal record of someone exonerated of a crime. And in May, he introduced a bill later unanimously passed by the Senate to increase police officer training and reduce use of excessive force. Ellie Savit is the prosecutor-elect for Washtenaw County, already hard at work on transitioning into that role. Ellie served as the City of Detroit's senior legal counsel, where he led criminal justice reform work for Michigan's largest city, including the expungement of criminal records and crafting city and state policies that will reduce the prison population and promote rehabilitation and workforce development for returning citizens. He's a faculty member of the University of Michigan Law School. Delphia Simpson has served as the county public defender since her appointment to the office by the Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners in November 2017. Prior to that, she worked with the Michigan Poverty Law Program and the ACLU of Michigan as its racial justice staff attorney before joining the Washtenaw Public Defender's Office in 2003. Ms. Simpson chairs several nonprofit boards, including the Michigan Advocacy Program and the Ann Arbor NAACP Legal Redress Committee. She is also past president of the Washtenaw County Bar Association. Alma Wheeler-Smith has been dedicated to public service for over 30 years and served in the Michigan legislature for 14 years and is the co-chair of Citizens for Racial Equity in Washtenaw. Governor Rick Snyder appointed Alma to fill a term on the Michigan Civil Rights Commission from February 2018 to December 31, 2019. She currently serves on the boards of the Regional Transit Authority of Southeast Michigan, the Michigan Campaign Finance Network, the Michigan Legislative Retirement System, and is chair of the Board of Directors of University Bank of Ann Arbor. And I'll turn it over to Wendy, who's going to ask our panelists the first round of questions.
Thank you, Christine. So, Reverend Harrold, the first question we'd like to start with you, if you don't mind, and that is, as Christine indicated, many of us have had the chance to see Bryan Stevenson's TED Talk, and in that, he takes an excerpt from his book, Just Mercy, and I think perhaps many have also had the opportunity to read that book as well. And one of the things that he quotes from his grandmother, and I'm a grandmother, so I like this particular quote. He says that she said to him, "You can't understand most of the things from a distance. You have to get close." So, Reverend Harrold, it appears to us that you certainly have gotten close to this issue as you've been a chaplain here in Washtenaw County, dealing with the incarcerated persons in our system. Can you just speak to us a little bit about that, about your experiences over the many years?
Well, thank you, Wendy, and thank you, Christine, and thank you to MCSP and the Ann Arbor District Library for convening this conversation. When I read that question, the first thing that came to my mind is that the majority of the men, and I mostly work with men, and most of the jail is men, are young and Black. Someone else, crew, did something statistically about charges, but if you just walk into the jail, you will see they're overwhelmingly young and they're overwhelmingly Black. You see that a lot of them have mental health issues. I have been teaching a class, and the nurse came by with meds, and we literally had to stop the class because three-quarters of the class sometimes had to go out and get their medication. And so you see some folks in the jail system that are stabilized because they are on medication while they're in jail. They are smart. And you look and say that had circumstances happened in other ways, they may be sitting in a class at Michigan or Eastern or someplace they are smart young men. But likewise, you also have folks that the school system did not serve them well, and they are illiterate. They can't read. You see repeat offenders. Um, you come back 5, 6 years, and you see folks again. You see young men that know each other, which tells me that they're getting arrested in the same neighborhood. And so they know each other and they're friends with each other. It's not to say that, they're a bunch of criminals, but if you have policing in one spot, you're going to arrest people in one spot. They are there for drug convictions. And again, if you are arrested in a spot, you are going to pick folks up in the spot. And so they come a lot from um, south side of Ypsi or from Ypsilanti, more so than they come from west side of Ann Arbor, um, the surrounding communities. Um, and you see people that are cycling. They've been in jail, to prison, back home, in jail, to prison. And you see people that have mental health issues. But here's one thing that I will say, maybe just to make my comments come to an end. Um, they all want better for their kids. Now, I ask my men in the jail, I take a book, say, write down your prayer requests. And it's pray for my son, pray for my daughter, pray for my family, pray for my kids. I've never seen anyone that has the aspiration that their child winds up in jail, but they always want better for their kids. So we see fathers, we see mothers. And if Stevenson was talking about getting close, you see neighbors. I've seen my children's classmates in the county jail, kids that my son played basketball with in the county jail, neighbors of ours in the county jail. So, I mean, the jail population are our kids, there are neighbors, there are sons and daughters, there are community. And a justice system that can do all it can to keep them out of that system and what a community to get them out of that system bears up to what Bryan Stevenson said about um, looking at how a society treats the least of those and most vulnerable in this society.
Thank you so much, Reverend Harrold. And our next question will go to Attorney Simpson. Um, we wonder if you could respond to what Reverend Harrold just told us. What is your perspective as a public defender, and what are your experiences with your clients?
Well, first, I'd like to thank you for inviting me here this evening and having the opportunity to speak on an issue that's near and dear to my heart and a passion of mine. Clearly, I committed most of my career to in this area. So sadly, I can't disagree with Reverend Harrold. The population in the jail is predominantly African American. The population that we serve at the public defender's office is predominantly African American. We're the indigent defense provider for most of the county courts. So, we represent people who have low income, who can't afford an attorney. So we see the poverty that is in Washtenaw County. We do see folks come recycle back in and for back in through the system several times. So those are I see the same thing that Reverend Harrold sees. I think our job and what I think what we do for our clients in that system is we are storytellers within the confines of the legal justice system, the confines of the system. And so we try to tell the stories of individuals, what trauma they have had, what, their poverty issues, their addiction issues, in order for the court to be able to understand where our clients come from and why they find themselves in the situation that they might find themselves. I think what we believe that our clients experience as they go through the Washtenaw County system is it's better than most, I think, in the state. But I think they often enter, a courtroom where no one looks like them and no one in authority looks like them, and that is I disheartening to a lot of our clients. I think our clients, what they want, like anybody would want, is the opportunity to be judged fairly, to be at every decision point from the point they are arrested, be treated fairly, be heard, be recognized. And so I think the system doesn't do such a great job at that now. They want, so they don't do a great job at that. And I think I agree with Reverend Harrold when he talks about, and Bryan Stevenson, we talk about what we want is not a punitive system. We want a system that rehabilitates, gives folks opportunities to change, give them a chance to be restored and be restored to full citizenship. But that doesn't just start in the courtroom. That starts way beyond, where they're not looked at as criminals, or not looked at differently, and they're not treated differently. That starts way before they enter the criminal justice system. So I think it's a way that we look at, in particular, African-American men and African-American women, the way we look at them and how we treat them, that can really, I think, help the system have to be more just. I explained myself well.
Thank you so much, Attorney Simpson. And next, I'm just going to take a little bit of, we can call it a little bit of freedom, maybe a little bit of liberty. But before I actually ask the question of Alma Wheeler-Smith, I want to make sure that our audience knows that there is a lot more to former State Senator Alma Wheeler-Smith than meets the eye. Her father was the first African-American, the only African-American to be elected to mayor of the city of Ann Arbor. And her sister has been a judge here in Ann Arbor as well. And her son has also served and daughter-in-law have served in the state legislature. So certainly I would say that you've got some heavy-duty DNA in your system when it comes to these sorts of issues. But let me now go back to the script that I have and just ask you, so you and your colleagues at the Citizens for Racial Equity Washtenaw, you studied some of the data that is now available in the county about charging and judges' decisions. And can you tell us some of the patterns that you all have found?
I hope so. First, let me thank you for the opportunity to speak with your students and with the community. Our race to justice study revealed a pattern of racial disparity in terms of prosecution and punishment that sorely impacts the lives of Black people, people of color. And it's important to understand that Black people constitute 98% of that category in our study. The disparity was so stark that CREW released its report to the community with a call for immediate action. We found that in a study of Washtenaws circuit court website, it was the only entity within our criminal legal system that kept publicly available records. We found from a study of approximately 1,300 cases, some of which were removed from the study because there was no racial indication of who the defendants were, and other factors such as that. In the end, we analyzed, or a statistician who was independent of Crew, analyzed over 1,000 felony cases. And we looked at non-capital felony cases filed in the county court between 2017 and 2019, and all capital felony cases filed in Washtenaw County between 2013 and 2016. In all 11 categories, the prosecutors charge many more people of color than whites, up to 29 times more. In 10 of the 11 categories that we looked at in those felony case categories, the prosecutor filed more charges against people of color on average than whites. The difference in the average number of charges ranged from 12.8% to 62.9%. In all 11 of the categories that we looked at, prosecutors charged people of color as habitual offenders at a higher rate than non-whites. In 10 of the 11 categories that Crew studied, people of color also received more convictions per case on average than whites. And that was just looking at the prosecutor's side of the criminal legal system as we backed it out from the court's website. In looking at the court, while we found racial disparities among individual judges, Crew did not find that the Washtenaw County Circuit Court as a whole demonstrated a pattern of racial disparity in its sentencing of our community members across all of the 8 case categories we studied. That's not to say that we didn't find any instances of disparity across the court. For example, our data revealed that 44% of the people of color convicted of homicide were sentenced to life in prison, compared with only 27.3% of white defendants. Most of the judges contributed to a wide racial disparity in the average minimum maximum sentence in armed robbery cases. In addition, we highlighted 23 instances across case categories that we studied where an individual judge was out of step with others on the court in terms of harsher sentencing, or whose sentences showed racial disparities. So we certainly, in the process of reviewing the data that we were able to find available to the public, we did find that there was a significant disparity in the number of individuals who were prosecuted and sentenced in Washtenaw County. It's very frustrating, and I think one of the things that surprised me the most was that the prosecutor's office was not collecting data of any kind in terms of demographics. There was apparently no curiosity or interest in why so many more people of color came before the prosecutor's office. And I have to say, extend that to the court, came before the court. No connecting the dots from law enforcement to prosecution to sentencing. And that was frustrating. And I may be intruding on a question that's coming up later, but I think it's also important because the people in our criminal justice system, the prosecutor, the judges, in the case of the county, the sheriff, are elected offices. It's important for the citizens to have some basis on which to judge their performance and to assure that they are reflecting the community's concern about equity and justice. And we don't have any of that information. And that was really the driving force behind Crew's study. Are we truly having equal access, not only in reality, but in perception? And we found Washtenaw County definitely lacking. Thank you.
So, Mr. Savit, the next question is for you. And certainly you've heard the stories that have been told this evening. And I know that you're no stranger to this as we look at your biography and the work that you've done in certainly in the city of Detroit. And just as an aside, is it true that you also worked with former Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg?
That is true. I had the great honor of clerking for her.
Thank you, thank you. So first of all, we appreciate that, and you have our condolences as well about her.
Thank you.
So the fact that we're going to ask you some hard questions is probably something that RBG would be totally in favor of, correct?
She would, and she asked more than her fair share of me. So I'm ready. I got good training for it.
All right, good. So as you've been working for your transition, tell us how have you been thinking about these issues that have been raised thus far?
Yeah, so I first and foremost, thank you for having me, and I also want to extend a really deep thanks to Alma and to the rest of crew for undertaking this really labor-intensive but very well done study using the data that was available. In my mind, it's long overdue, and the crew report is in many ways shocking in the starkness of the disparities that it lays out. But as Reverend Harrold said, and Chief Defender Simpson echoed, it's also sort of not surprising to anybody that's been in a Washtenaw County courtroom or in the jail. You can see the racial disparities with your own eyes there. And to my mind, it is frankly unacceptable that we have buried our heads in the sand with respect to these issues, that the prosecutor's office historically has not seen fit to track the racial disparities and the racial inequities that are coming out of the criminal justice system. And look, I think that if you can take the position that people should face consequences for what they did, but if there are going to be consequences, it should be because of what you did, not because of who you are. And I think the crew report lays bare that promise is not actualized in Washtenaw County, that we have really severe racial inequities in how the justice system treats defendants. And so what have we been looking at doing on our transition team? I made this commitment during the campaign, and it dovetails, I think, with the urgent call for further study in the crew report. But we have been having really fruitful conversations, I think, and I don't have anything to announce yet, but with independent third-party researchers about coming in and doing really a soup to nuts evaluation of the prosecutor's office and identifying where in the system we are seeing racially disparate treatment. The crew report identifies the outcomes. It identifies the disparities in outcomes. What it does not do, precisely because this data has not been kept and is not available, but it doesn't identify the treatment and at what point in the system is driving those outcomes. And I'll give you an example. The crew report says that Black people or people of color, though it is predominantly Black people in Washtenaw County, are 4 times more likely than white people to be charged with felony possession of a controlled substance, basically a felony drug offense. And to emphasize, that is on the low end of the disparity scale identified by crew. It goes all the way up to 29 times for certain types of crimes. But let's just take that for as an example. We know the outcomes. What we don't know is why that's happening. Is it the case that law enforcement is referring charges to the prosecutor's office at disproportionate rates for Black people than for white people for felony drug possession? That could be one thing that's driving it. Is it the case that the prosecutor's office is disproportionately declining to bring charges against white people versus against Black people? That could be another reason for that disparity. Is the prosecutor's office habitually charging white people with misdemeanors, with a lower drug offense, while for the same conduct, Black people face felony charges? That could be another driver of that disparity. We just don't know. And to my mind, that's unacceptable because we've been sticking our head in the sand for way too long. So what I've committed to doing is we are going to partner with an independent third-party research evaluator. They are going to come in, they are going to identify every point in the system where we are seeing people of color being treated differently than white people for similar conduct, from charging up through plea bargaining, which is a huge driver of the criminal justice system. It really is the motor that drives the justice system. 95% plus of cases are disposed of via plea bargaining. So you've got to look at the plea deals that are being offered, through, who's getting access to rehabilitation and drug diversion programs, who is getting really long sentences imposed to them because the prosecutor's office sought to designate them as a habitual offender, which means that your prison sentence is going to be much longer. We've got to know this stuff. And once we identify that disparate treatment, my pledge is that we're going to eliminate it in the prosecutor's office. But the only way that we can do that is by opening our eyes, by moving past a system where we just stuck our head in the sand with respect to these issues, and with taking a really hard look at ourselves and the justice system that we have here in Washtenaw County. And I think it's been sparked by the Crew report, and this sort of discussion is long overdue, and we're going to make every effort to get to the bottom of this and ensure that everybody is treated equitably in our justice system.
Thank you, Mr. Savit. And next, we are going to hear from he's my state senator, Jeff Irwin. And I think I've known Jeff for a long time now, probably close to 20 years, even when he was I believe, a student at the university, and he hasn't aged a bit. But let me just say, you've heard the case. You've heard from a number of people here, from us on the local level, and you, out of all of us here, probably have much greater opportunity to affect change for a number of the things which we are asking, because we know that the local issues sometimes are sort of kept down because of what's happening on a state level. And just to emphasize, you're currently on the State Senate Judiciary and Public Safety Committee. So how do the issues here in Washtenaw County intersect with those issues that you see statewide as you work with your colleagues in the State Senate?
Well, thank you, Wendy, and it's great to see you again. And I just want to first express some gratefulness to be a part of this panel, and to the folks with Community Scholars Program and the District Library for organizing it, and just to put me on this panel with so many folks who I have so much respect for in terms of the fight for social justice and restorative justice here in Washtenaw County. So thank you for that. My journey along this road started right around the time that you and I met, Wendy, 20 years ago in 1999. I got elected to the County Board of Commissioners, and one of the first things I did was tour the county jail. And that was an eye-opening experience because I knew that we had a problem with racism in the criminal justice system. But when you walk through the county jail, it smacks you right in the face. And the question that I had for then Sheriff Scheibel and the jail commander then was Jerry Clayton, and for judges and public defenders and prosecutors, all the years that I spent on the County Board of Commissioners is why, and how? How is it that in a county with the population that we have, you see such an overrepresentation in the jail of, as Reverend Harrold said, young Black men? And it's just overwhelming. And we've been working on that for a number of years. I'm really heartened to hear about some of the potential changes that we might see in the prosecutor's office. I'm really grateful for the work that the Crew report has done to help us zero in on some of these problems locally. But as you said, there's a tremendous element of the state work that's required here. And I'm really fortunate to be able to do that work on behalf of our residents. I mean, we have the best constituents here in Washtenaw County of anywhere else in the state, and I benefit from that greatly. And in line with that, I think Reverend Harrold really laid it out in a great way at the beginning when he really covered the wide waterfront of issues that need to be worked on if we're having a serious conversation about getting the racism out of our criminal justice system. And we can't just talk about what's happening in court. We also have to talk about what's happening in our mental health system. We also have to talk about what's happening in our education system with respect to the equity of the resources that are provided, but also with respect to issues like school discipline and how our disparate school discipline policies affecting our young, mostly Black residents in a way that holds them back in the future. Those are important issues. We need to look at issues of how we treat mental health and substance abuse here in the state of Michigan. This is incredibly important. We need to also look at economic justice. We don't have an economy that works equally for everyone. So these are huge, weighty issues. But what I wanted to kind of zero in on a little bit more in my limited amount of time to talk here is, some of the issues I think that are going relatively well in Lansing, where there's actually a really good bipartisan conversation that is driving a little bit of progress. So just here in the last 2 years, I'm really happy to report that we were able to debate and finally pass legislation to raise the age. That means that we're now going to treat 17-year-olds as kids as the default. And in order to treat them as an adult, we're going to have to, there's going to have to be a separate petition for that. That was an important win we've had in the last couple of years. Just last week, the governor signed an important piece of legislation that's called the Clean Slate bills that provide a much better opportunity for folks to get their records cleared, to get an expungement here in Michigan. It used to be that Michigan was one of the hardest states to get your record cleared. Now, because of this law that was just signed, Michigan is one of those states where if you get back on track, we're going to make it easier for you to stay on track. I think that's really important, and I'm really happy that we've had some progress in that area. What hasn't yet been done, though, is that I introduced legislation, Senate Bill 681, that would be clean slate for kids. Let's apply those same types of opportunities for folks to get their records cleared if they committed their offense when they're a juvenile. And that bill's out of the Senate. It's in the House. I hope to get it on the governor's desk before the end of the year. Another thing that there is a lot of talk about, but we haven't seen any bills signed yet, is around this issue of police reform. And I want folks to know that I'm working on those issues. I'm working on, one, trying to beef up and improve citizen oversight. And the governor this summer just added citizen members to the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards, the state oversight body for police. And hopefully we can use that as an opportunity to model great behavior for our local governments in terms of how to provide citizen oversight that is meaningful and drives better results in the community. We're working on requiring independent investigations. That's Senate Bill 993. That would say that when there is this type of incident in our community, that the investigation can't be handled by the same officers and the same prosecutors in that community that all work together on the law enforcement team. That's got to be handled by a special unit at the Attorney General's office. I've got legislation to improve police training, Senate Bill 945, that passed the Senate. We're hoping to get action over in the House to require continuing education for police and for better training, more specific training on cultural competency and implicit bias. We're working on demilitarizing the police. That's important, trying to put limits on the use of riot gear and tear gas and chemical agents. And most importantly, perhaps, and this is the one where I always feel like I'm pushing the most uphill, is we need to end the war on drugs. This is a huge part of what's driving the negative interactions on the streets. It's a huge part of what drives the disproportionate and racist elements in our criminal justice system. And we know that for two reasons. One, because if you look back at the origination of the war on drugs during the Nixon administration, it was explicitly created for the purpose of breaking up and jailing Black leaders and left-wing anti-war leaders. But also, you don't have to go back to history to know that. You can just look at the way it plays out in our communities. So, we need to end the war on drugs. And then one final issue I want to put on the table that I'm working on that I think is really, really important, but it's always hard to get people's attention to because it's in the weeds, is this issue of how we treat the poor in our criminal justice system and how we use the criminal justice system, and particularly our district courts, as a revenue source for our local governments. And, what we've been working on in the legislature for a few years now, and I've been struggling to get traction on, is this idea that, we need to separate the fines and the fees and make sure that when folks are brought through district court, that they're not, used as a revenue source, and that we don't grind them into pulp economically, which is what we do to so many poor people in our district courts. And, when you look at what's driving warrants, when you look at what's driving, the jail admissions, you start to see that there's this pattern of criminalizing poverty, criminalizing the poor. And if we can deal with those issues of fees and fines, we can make a big difference, not just in improving the lives of the folks who are subjects of the criminal justice system, but we can also take that yoke off of folks. We can take these folks who are struggling against poverty and give them a better chance to succeed. So there's so much work being done in this area, and it's really exciting to be in the legislature right now and to be on the Senate Judiciary Committee right now because of the fact that there's actually some progress on some of these important issues. So thanks for having me as a part of this.
Thank you so much. And now I think I'm turning it back over to Christine.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. And thank you all so much for your passion and your dedication to these issues in the various ways that you're working on them and for sharing your knowledge with us. I want to now open it to the audience for questions. You're welcome to type those questions in the Q&A. I believe you may also have a way to raise your hand at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And we can invite you to unmute at that point if you want to ask a question live. But please, now is the time. What questions you have for any particular panelist or for all of the panelists, go ahead and type those in the chat or use the raise hand function to unmute or to get us to unmute your mic. Okay, there's a question from Jeff in the chat. He says, recognizing that nowhere is perfect and there's always work to be done, what cities, counties, or states have made positive strides to reduce some of the racial disparities the panelists have listed? What are the steps you've seen there that we could take to emulate here in Washtenaw County? Where are you looking for role models? I guess that's a good question.
I can start on that because I consider myself to be part of the progressive prosecutor movement, where you're seeing people run for the elected position of prosecutor, really with a goal of eliminating inequity and turning the page on the era of mass incarceration. I'd say that the city of San Francisco is a pretty good example of a jurisdiction that has been a leader in implementing a lot of policies around inequity, even dating back to the last district attorney that they had. They are currently engaged in a pilot study with Stanford University, in which actually prosecutors do not see any racial identifiers when they are deciding whether to charge somebody with a crime. They see the police report, but the name of the person that is being accused of the crime is redacted. Their race, of course, is redacted. The name of the victim is redacted. The area that it happened in is redacted, because often you can sort of make inferences if it's a predominantly Black neighborhood or a white neighborhood. I'm watching very closely the outcomes of that to see if that indeed leads to a narrowing or elimination of racial inequity in charging. Another thing that they've done and that other jurisdictions across the country have enacted is no longer charging sort of minor contraband violations that are a result of what we call pretext stops. I'll dig into a little bit more detail here, but basically, a police officer can stop you and pull you over for any observed violation of a traffic law, or a law. And I guarantee you, anybody that drives commits a violation of a traffic law about once every 4 seconds, including me. We just have so many traffic laws. Often what they're doing there is you see racial profiling. You see racial profiling across the country. And they're not often really interested in the traffic violation. What they're interested in is looking for drugs or other sort of contraband. So what San Francisco has done is they'd said, look, if you're pulled over and it's a racial profiling incident, and the reason that you were pulled over is not really the reason that the officer made the stop, we're not going to charge you with those sort of drug crimes and those contraband offenses, which really has a downstream effect of eliminating the incentive to engage in racial profiling and racially profiled traffic stops. I could go on, but a couple of other things that I think are worth mentioning is several jurisdictions across the country have eliminated cash bail, a system in which you're held pending trial simply because you don't have enough money to pay to get out. Washington, D.C. is a great example. New Jersey is a great example. They've been able to do it without compromising public safety. So they've shown that this can work. And you're seeing prosecutors around the country who are no longer seeking cash bail. That's the case in San Francisco. It's the case in Chittenden County, Vermont. There's several prosecutors in Massachusetts that don't seek cash bail, and you haven't seen crime spike as a result of it. So it's putting lie to this notion that you need to functionally criminalize poverty to keep us safe. I could go on about other jurisdictions for an hour, but those are some of the jurisdictions, some of the innovations that I'm looking at and that we're looking to put into place in the Washtenaw Prosecutor's Office.
Great, thanks. We have a couple more questions in the chat, and I want to ask this one from Anthony. He directed it to Jeff Irwin, but I wonder if Alma might also have an answer for this. When you've tried to push your changes through the legislature or in any system, right? What kind of pushback do you get? Where are the points of resistance to change in the system?
When I first started working in this area, I was on the Appropriations Committee and in the House as chair of the House Appropriations Committee. So we were actually getting help from what I thought was an unusual source, and that was from the business community. It was selfish on their part because they wanted, money coming to the businesses and not going into the correction system. So they turned out to be a great ally, but we had tremendous, I don't want this to sound partisan, but we had resistance from the Republican Party. I worked with Senator Alan Cropsey, who was the Senate chair of the subcommittee on corrections. And Alan surprised me as a very conservative, sometimes a reactionary legislator. He was right there looking at the opportunities we had to make change. And his reasons were because it was the right thing to do. But our pushback came from people who had bought into the myth that first, Michigan is a more criminal state somehow than other states around us. And secondly, that Black folks are more violent and criminal than anybody else in the population. So it was the response that from myth-based that you really didn't have facts to counter that gave us the most problems. So we started out working with the Pew Charitable Trust and their social justice initiative to look at the sentences, who was in prison, why they were there, how long they were there. And the Michigan Prisoner Reentry Initiative began then to actually see how we could change lives for people who were already incarcerated.
Yeah, thank you. Those myths are persistent and hard to eradicate.
Yeah.
Jeff, do you want to talk about obstacles you faced, or what are the challenges?
Yeah, I mean, there are many things that have changed in Lansing since the time that Senator Alma Wheeler-Smith served, and I did get the opportunity to, which I was very grateful for, to work in her office and learned a lot working for and with Senator Smith. So, a lot of the things that are the same in terms of barriers are that there are organized interest groups like the Prosecuting Attorneys Association of Michigan, like the Michigan Sheriff's Association, Chiefs of Police, other organizations like that are invested in the get tough on crime, lock them up, throw away the key philosophy. And that's not to say that there aren't some prosecutors or some sheriffs or some voices within those associations that are, more progressive, But it is to say that when you start making proposals to say change criminal records and to allow people a greater opportunity to get their records cleared, it's usually the prosecutors and the police that will come forward and say, well, wait a second, we convicted that person, and we charged them with a whole kitchen sink full of stuff that they pled down to that. So really that person's much more dangerous than you might think they are. And so those are the kinds of pushbacks that we get. Just generally this idea that there has to be accountability and that people have to be punished. And that's the generalized thing that we're up against. But I think what's changed now is that there is a lot more conservative energy. I think that the forces on that side that are interested in criminal justice reform are growing. And that's for a couple of key reasons. One is because the criminal justice system is a very, very, and particularly the war on drugs, is an incredibly expensive, failed big government program. And so that speaks to some conservatives right there. And then the other piece is that now that the opioid crisis and, also I think crystal methamphetamines as well really started to hit rural white communities, the attitudes about drug use and drug abuse in those communities have changed a little bit. And while folks may have been happy to throw the book at folks during the 80s, around the crack epidemic, or around the heroin epidemic then, nowadays, a lot of these conservative politicians that represent these rural white areas, they're saying, well, maybe Johnny has a problem and Johnny's a good kid. And, maybe what Johnny really needs is a program and some help. And it's like, yeah, damn right. Let's do it. Let's go that way. Let's bring back substance abuse treatment on demand. Let's bring back residential programs. Let's bring back real help for people and stop pretending that we're going to solve this with badges and guns and jail cells.
Thanks, Jeff. So there's two more questions and they're kind of related. And since it's 8:02, I'm going to put them together. We don't have any police officers here, but these questions both relate to policing. And so I'll toss them out there and I'll be interested to hear what y'all think. The first one is this. Reverend Harrold mentioned that who you arrest depends on what corner you're standing on. How do we get police to change who police are policing? For example, we all know wealthy white kids have more money for drugs than poor Black kids. How do we get police departments to police more equitably? And then a sort of related question, schools rely on law enforcement to treat what should be internal issues of school discipline. No surprise, this leads to criminal charges against juveniles, impeding opportunities later in life. How do we get cops out of school? So anybody want to tackle those?
I will take a stab at it.
Thank you.
Sure. I don't know. I think those are, at questions that are really at the root of, what we're seeing in the criminal justice system now and the pipeline to prison issue is, you start out in the school. If you have police officers in school, and we've seen it in Washtenaw County where they've have criminalized, youthful behavior, kids' behavior, and they end up in juvenile court, and then they get like a conviction there, and then they, get labeled, and then they go on to the next level, and it goes on and on. And so I think how we, really get, police out of school is by, talking and noticing who's on your local city government, and on the board of commissioners, on city council, who are there, because they then can put the pressure on the law enforcement agency and say that's not the policy for the particular jurisdiction. We don't want to pay for police in school. What we want is the children there to be educated and nurtured and given opportunity. And so I think there's a movement in Washtenaw County and in certain jurisdictions not to have police in school, but I think they're still present at many of the high schools and so forth around the county. As far as getting, I think that's a real complex issue as far as, training police not to over police in certain areas. I think it's a change in philosophy from the head of the police department. If they, tell folks, what I want you to do is, law enforcement officers to be in the community and get to know the community that you are policing, as opposed to arresting and the folks in the community. I think you would see some differences in who they arrest if they get to know them, and they're get to know the families, get to know and build trust with the community. And I think you'll see a difference in who's arrested and what they're arrested for. It's just my 2 cents.
If I may speak on this very briefly. So we have elected officials and someone appointed by elected officials. And I think one thing that's missing in this discussion is, to borrow a phrase from way back, the power of the people. So I looked at Prosecutor-elect Savit used the term progressive prosecuting movement. And a lot of movements are fueled by the desires of communities to insist on something different. And so organizing by neighborhoods and groups and churches and citizens to demand of the elected officials that we want to change in what happens. And we want to change in how police interact with our citizens in our neighborhoods, what's happening in the courts. And so in a democracy, people do get a say in the government that they get. We often talk about Ann Arbor being progressive. Well, that's not necessarily out of the goodness of the hearts of the people elected, but that you have progressive people elect progressive representatives. I'm hearing the same words out of Jeff's mouth that I'm hearing from Alma's mouth. And it's not unusual that the expectation that you want something different comes from the citizens. So I would say to people listening, citizen organizing brings about a big difference in what we get in our elected officials, and that is we're holding them accountable. And I will say this, every vote counts. I've thought for years, if Appalachia and the hood organized and voted and exercised their power, we'd see a radical shift in what's happening. Jeff kind of pointed to it, that if the folks in rural communities would have partnered earlier with folks in Black communities, we would have had an end to this war on drugs that criminalize poor people more than people with means a whole lot earlier. I will close by saying this. Someone talked about drug use. I'm just going to throw this out anecdotally. When Prosecutor-elect Savit talked about us committing a violation every 4 seconds, I would bet money that if police did raids on frat houses and sorority houses on Michigan's campus on Friday night, they would overflow the jail. But you're not going to have a LawNet raid on a fraternity house. It just is not going to happen. Now, will you have it on Pookie's basement party? Yeah, every weekend. But it's not going to happen. And that becomes an issue of what we expect and what we hold accountable our elected officials for.
So the last question that we want to give everybody 15 or 30 seconds to answer is this one. And somebody in the Q&A actually anticipated this question. So it must be the question that we need to end on, obviously. What can average citizens do to support criminal legal system reform in Washtenaw? And I'd love to have each of you answer that.
I'll take a crack at it. You know, I have to echo Jeff. It's important for the citizens to be involved and engaged. And if they need to talk to their county commissioners, if they know the judges in the county, they should be talking to them about what their plans are for working with the county commission, the prosecutor's office, to change what's happening in the courts. We have a great opportunity with a new prosecutor who is dedicated to changing justice in this county and initiating restorative justice opportunities. And he needs to be encouraged and supported. Working with Jeff as part of a pressure group, coming together as Reverend Harrold said is important. Sometimes we have unusual coalitions that can be built around the issue of police in school, say, working with the Student Advocacy Center and with PTAs and PTOs. Student Advocacy Center has tremendous information on the police in the school and what kind of differences and disparity and lack of opportunity it's created for Black kids. And, you know, getting together and working together to change what's happening by dint of our elected officials is what citizens can do most effectively.
Great, thank you. Jeff Irwin, 30-second answer.
Sure. Vote, 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 vote. But, you know, also make sure you ask your elected officials questions about what they're going to do. I think that's the first part of this cycle of accountability that's being talked about is, you know, we have a very limited window here before the election coming up for folks to talk to these candidates and to ask them questions about these important issues and what are they going to do if they get in there. And then, you know, after the election, I would just encourage everyone to build a relationship with their elected officials, understand how important these local elected officials are and the decisions they make. Folks like judges, these are incredibly important offices. And I think that as a citizen or an activist, the most important thing I can tell you is that for most of us that are sitting in positions of public service and elected office, we want to hear from you. I'm telling people constantly, please call me. Tell me what you know, because I don't know what you know. If you tell me, then maybe I will know. And I get tremendous value from when my constituents reach out to me and say, you should see this or you should know that. So when sometimes it's helpful for folks who are out there just to know that we want to hear from you. We desire to hear from you. And if you find an elected official who doesn't want to hear from you, then you should probably replace them.
Thanks. Ms. Simpson, do you want to go?
Sure. I have kind of two points, and I'll try to keep them within 30 seconds. The first is the power, as many have said, of citizens coming together. I can say after the crew report came out and these were citizens, you know, my phone was ringing off the hook about, oh, what can we do? What should we be doing? How to solve this issue? What, you know, can we get together to talk, when before the momentum was not there at all to even talk about the issue. So thank you for starting the conversation in the community. Second, I would say many of the people that are watching today are probably engaged in the community in some fashion, but they probably know people who are not engaged or have thought that, you know, their voice does not matter. And I would urge you to bring along a person that you know that is like that, and let them know that their voice does matter, that voting matters, writing a letter matters, going to, I know Jeff has many opportunities out in the community, well, back before COVID, you know, where you could go and talk to him and, you know, take them, take an afternoon to go and talk to those who represent us. And I think that can make a huge change in how we, a huge change in how we look at the criminal justice system.
Pastor Harrold, you kind of got us started on that track. Do you want to add anything to your initial response to that?
Just organize and push back and expect a pushback, and just be ready to push back on the pushback.
Thanks. And Mr. Savit, ordinary citizens, students, what can they do?
Well, so I'll echo everything that's already been said. Need to get politically engaged, need to vote. Ultimately, these decisions are made largely by elected or appointed officials, and I can't overstate the importance of that enough. I will build on what Pastor Harrold said too. Educate yourself about these issues. Part of the issue with criminal justice reform is that the criminal justice system takes place behind closed doors. And if you are not involved in the justice system, either as the victim or as somebody accused of a crime or potentially as a witness, many people just don't know what's going on there. But if you explain it to people, I can guarantee, and Jeff alluded to this, people are on our side of criminal justice reform across the political spectrum. You can come at it from a financial perspective. You can come at it from, an equity perspective. You can just come at it from a fundamental fairness perspective. But if you hear about some of these policies and you educate yourself enough to be able to explain this to people that don't know what's going on in the justice system, I guarantee you can really change hearts and minds on this more than potentially any other issue, precisely because so much of it is sort of a mystery to the general public because the criminal justice system doesn't interact with their daily lives. So there's real opportunities to win people over here if you get involved, if you get informed, and if you talk to your friends, your neighbors, your families, and organize.
Great, thank you. I want to say one last thing also that I heard running through many of your stories or many of your accounts of your work, and that is that listening to people's stories is important. I heard Jeff saying that, I heard Delphia saying that, and all of us have the opportunity to listen to our neighbors and hear what's going on with them, learn more and be curious. And I think that's an incredibly important thing to remember as well. And I hope that tonight's event has helped you to get more curious about things. After we say goodbye and thank our panelists, I will put on the screen the link to the crew report so you can see it as you exit. It's also not hard to Google. You can Google Crew Washtenaw and that'll probably bring it up. But that's good reading and lots of opportunities for additional learning and action in there. So thank you all panelists for coming. We appreciate your time this evening. We appreciate your staying a little bit over time this evening. And we wish you a pleasant evening and fight the good fight out there. Bye, everybody.